Wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guests are the director and star of the devastatingly beautiful new film, Wildlife. In it, Carey Mulligan stars as a housewife in 1960 Montana who begins to suffer a bit of a breakdown after her husband leaves town and she's left alone with her adolescent son. Paul Dano's debut film is beautiful, heartbreaking, and incredibly well done. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Sorry I'm late.
Talk to your father. Tell him not to act like a fool.
I am not being foolish. I put my name on a list, I waited for my chance, and now they finally have a place for me.
You don't know anything about fires. You'll get burned up.
Well, I've been reading about them. I know enough.
You've been reading about them? You've been studying up?
Don't turn my words on me, Jean.
Dad, what's going on?
Your father is leaving us to go and fight those wildfires.
What? Dad, why?
Answer him, Jerry. You won't take a job at a grocery store, but you'll go out with a bunch of deadbeats and risk getting killed.
Jean, I have to go. They're gonna leave without
What does it pay?
What?
What does it pay?
$1 an hour.
Oh my God. Jerry, listen, you don't have to do this.
But
I'm
I know,
working
but
now.
it won't be for long.
What if, not if you get yourself killed?
It's gonna snow. The fire's gonna go out.
What if
They're
it
gonna send
doesn't-
everybody
what if it
home.
never snows at
Joe,
all?
what do you think? Is
Oh
this a
my
bad
God.
idea?
Don't ask him. He'll approve of
He's
anything
almost
you do.
grown. He has a
All
say in
right,
what
okay,
happens in
your
this
father gets
family.
burned up and you never see him again. Then
What?
you guys go straight to
Don't
hell
say
together.
that, Jean!
You can't keep running every time something doesn't go your
Dad,
way.
please.
You don't know what I'm doing.
Don't I? I'm a grown woman, Jerry. Why don't you act like a grown man?
Everybody, please welcome writer-director Paul Dano and star Carey Mulligan. Hi. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Congratulations. I can't tell you enough how much I loved this film. All of these kind words are more than worth it. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. Thank you.
That's so nice.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning. You co-wrote this film with your partner, Zoe Kazan, and you've been working on the film for about 4 years now, give or take?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I first read a book by Richard Ford called Wildlife in 2011 or 2012. Just had some sort of, it took roots in me immediately. Started thinking about, oh my God, could this be a film? And could this be my film? And then I sort of interrogated it for about a year. Why me? Why? And can this work? And
Had you been wanting to make a film prior to, had you been thinking about it?
for some time. Yeah, for a long time, really. Yeah, and I just couldn't put pen to paper. I couldn't come up with it. And then this was it. So I wrote a first draft, which I secretly thought was pretty good, and then I gave it to Zoe, and she just tore it apart. And Zoe is a proper writer. She's written plays. She's written screenplays. This was my first go at it, so I was particularly vulnerable when I gave her, the first draft.
But that's what a good partner with good taste will do, is they will be brutally honest with you.
I suppose so.
You didn't like the brutal honesty.
I
in
could
that
have
moment.
used just a little more sugar on the first, on the first set of notes. So we fought enough 5 pages into the notes that she said, "Why don't you just let me do a pass? I think it would be easier to show you instead of telling you." And I said, "Great," which I really think I was probably like, "Well, if you're so smart, you do it."
So get me out of this notes conversation
No.
now.
Yeah, and then we basically traded the draft back and forth, which was a really fruitful way for us to work, not only as a couple, but I think it allowed us to each kind of put ourselves in it personally and just start to take steps away from the book in a healthy way, meaning follow the characters, let it become a film.
Where do you, put yourself in it personally, where do you see yourself in the film? Obviously everywhere, because you co-wrote and directed it, but is there a character or a theme within the story itself that you feel particularly close to?
Yeah, I think, the boy's experience. I think sort of the mystery of who our parents are was one of the first sort of intoxicating things about it. That sort of moment when you realize your parents had a past life and that they have problems and that they're like real people, and sort of, I don't know, something about waking up one day and being like the world's different, and I think it's just that you're like growing up. And I saw my parents and my grandparents in it too. I think the hope is that, we've all got a family. Family is just one of those things where no matter what we go through, we're still family in some capacity. So even if there's divorce or something, like my parents are still my parents, like your child is still your child. Like there's not that many things in the world I feel like you can say that about, where the bond is so deep. It's just a part of you forever.
Carey, your performance is extraordinary in this movie, and one of the things that is so great about your performances are all the things that you don't say that you have to say with your face. There are so many moments where you are doing something, I hesitate to say ugly, but something that you wouldn't necessarily do with your child, but your character is heartbroken. So she's kind of consistently walking this line of whether or not she's doing the right thing, knowing she's doing the wrong thing, but can't really stop herself because of just how she's personally feeling. Can you talk about creating this performance and knowing how you would behave moment to moment on camera?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know going in. And we sort of worked on it as we went. I think the scene that you showed is obviously the tipping point, and that's right before, you know, her story in this film really starts. But for 14 years, really, because their son's 14, she's been keeping it all together, and really she's never disagreed with him. So that scene where they're fighting and she's reprimanding him for his choice is sort of the first time probably in 14 years that she's really ever behaved like that. So then, you know, the rest of the film shows her sort of trying to play out various identities that she might have had her life gone a different way. And that was all there in the sort of fabric of the script. What was, you know, that was so exciting about reading this was that Zoe and Paul had written this woman who is just going completely off the rails, but really trying to stay on the train tracks. But then there are also moments where she's sort of enjoying not having any control and not being... So, you know, it's a sort of wonderful mess, which I was so excited to try and understand. But what was so striking about reading the script was that this woman had been written so completely, and often that's not the case with female characters. There's sort of a thin drawing of what a woman might be, but this was, Zoe and Paul had thought through everything that she did, and my job was to sort of figure it out for myself, you know, which was really exciting.
I think so often with a story like that, a woman or a person who's going off the rails and trying to keep it together, we would get a collection of scenes, each of them detailed that one thing, right? Whereas with this, we get a collection of scenes where those feelings and emotions are all happening in that one scene. And we see her on her own emotional roller coaster ride in the midst of a couple lines of dialogue. Is that something that you're aware of while you're doing those scenes, or do you try to focus on one thing in the moment for that scene?
I think, yeah, it sort of varied from scene to scene. I definitely feel like there were scenes where I was sort of completely lost, and Paul was really good. No, I mean, as an actress.
As an actress.
Yeah. And Paul was so great because he understood her journey so well, and he was really great at sort of pushing me. You know, it's a really vulnerable thing to play, to make really stupid choices on camera, and also to play really drunk on camera, to play out of control. Like, you just feel like, you know, it's just sort of very exposing. And I think, you know, my instinct sometimes can be to hold back a bit. And Paul was really good at just sort of like allowing me to like do anything, make mistakes, do it again, do it 10 times, change it, you know. And so I think a lot of the stuff, you know, in the more tricky scenes in the middle of the film are a result of like working with Paul to try and understand where she is in her journey, because sometimes she has no idea as well.
Yeah.
Carrie's sort of underselling herself here, and you know, it's really like working with like the greatest ballerina in the world, where you know, her work is so sort of detailed and layered that as a filmmaker, you know, we could have fun on set by really going a little bit left or a little bit right, and knowing that we were still sort of within the bounds of the film and the character, and because the film is shot sort of, there's a spareness to the film, and I think it really allowed us to go to work. So even though I wasn't acting in it, I felt through these guys that we were just able to kind of let go a bit, and it was so fun to see them sort of cut loose.
You give the kind of performance where at times while you're watching the movie, you can imagine the crew all going, "Oh my God, are you seeing what we're getting right now? This is incredible."
That happened, actually. Do you remember? So actually that scene we just showed, Justin, do you remember Justin?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was hiding behind a bounce board, just a piece of white cardboard right below that table, just out of frame. And do you remember how long you guys just kind of reset, and they just fought like 11 takes in a row, basically?
At one point, I got to like there were a bunch of papers on the table, and I got to like sweep them all off onto the floor. It was the most fun
actor's
thing I've
dream.
ever done.
Yes, they were so, I mean, and Jake and Carrie were so incredible together. And I remember when we cut, because he was down there for quite some time, he came back into the room where the monitor was, and he was like, I've never been close to that kind of thing before. I've never been that close. He was like blown away. He was so excited.
Yeah, and I think of specifically the scene, you know, no spoilers, obviously, but in Bill Camp's house, where it's just like you said, there's a sparseness to the direction, but the way that you hold on faces starting from the beginning of the movie really starts paying off in that scene as we see your character's dilemmas just appear on your face within split seconds of each other. How does she take care of this kid? How does she live as this new woman in this new life? Is this new life good for her? It's all there in split seconds. It's really stunning. No question, just a compliment.
No, that's so nice. And you know, really, the film is so reliant on Carrie and Jake and Ed, our kid, this kid from Australia named Ed Oxenbould, who's really wonderful. And you just couldn't express the film without them. You know, there would be no film to make without what they're giving us, sort of with their inner life. It's really incredible. I am an actor, but I remember watching behind the monitor and just thinking, like, I don't know how they do this.
You said the sparseness of the film and the way that you shot it. Most first-time filmmakers would come out of the gate and want to get as much coverage as possible because you're told as a filmmaker, get your coverage. You don't know what you're going to need in the editing room, and you get the sense with this movie, whether you got the coverage or not, that you knew exactly where the camera had to be for each scene because there is a limited number of shots. It creates a very specific aesthetic. What made you so confident going into this that you knew that would work come time to edit? Roll of the dice.
No, I mean, I think it was there from day one of writing almost. Yeah, I mean, it evolves and it changes, but the film to me always felt like just trying to be honest, and I've always loved like the illusion of simplicity. Like even like you think about like a Neil Young song, like 3 chords, but the words are just right, and like how do you... I just think that's one of the highest, sort of the most poetic ways to sort of approach something. And it took a lot. It took a village, so it's not just sort of, me, but, our cinematographer, Diego Garcia, I could not have done it without him. Incredible design team, like I said, the actors. So I think we pulled it off, and I feel like it's just the most honest way to show the characters.
What made you confident going into a project like this with Paul, it being his first film? What kind of conversations did you have going into it?
We didn't have any conversations. Just to firstly say, we're just now getting used to complimenting each other in front of each other because we've known each other for 10 years. So when we started doing press, if someone asked me to say something about Paul, I'd be like, yeah, he's fine. And so now we're getting better at like being honest and saying nice things, Wait, what was the question?
What made you confident pulling a performance off like this?
So I knew out of the gate that Paul was an extraordinary actor. He's someone that I've always held in such high esteem in terms of his work. And the common thread with all of Paul's work in whatever genre is honesty. And that's really the only thing I'm interested in doing, is just making an honest story about people and telling stories about real women and not ideas of what women are. And this film had both of those things. It had the promise of working with someone who is authentic and honest in all the work they do, and being able to tell a story about a real woman. Paul sent it to me and emailed me and said, like, read it and call me or whatever. And I called him like 90 minutes later the second I'd read it and said, yes, please, thank you. What a privilege, what an honor. It was so exciting to get to do it. But I just sort of knew that he would take all of the integrity and honesty that he has in his own acting work and transfer it to the screen.
Must have caught you in a vulnerable place. I feel like that was the fastest read I've ever gotten,
That must have been a confidence boost within 90 minutes of sending it off, getting a call.
Yeah, we were so excited. That was great. That was an incredible feeling. And that was really, we started with Jeanette and to cast the film, and we sent it to Carrie, and her saying yes, started the film actually getting made. Yeah.
Wow. And Jake is on it as a producer as well. When did you pitch this to him? When did he get involved?
Shortly after Carrie, I, knew actually that Carrie and Jake were kind of friends, or that they had maybe wanted to work together.
You worked with him on Prisoner.
I had worked with Jake on Prisoners, and I think I was about to film a film called Okja, this Bong Joon-ho film that we're both in. We don't really have scenes together. And I think I had recently seen him do just some incredible work, things like Nightcrawler, and I can't remember what else I'd seen at the time, but I thought, I wonder if he would want to do something sort of classically American, if that would like appeal to him. And we talked about family forever. After he read the script, we got on the phone. I remember I was in a parking lot somewhere. I had to pull my car over to take the call from Jake, and we just sat there, and I just talked to him forever about family. He had started this company. They're producing wonderful stuff, quite ambitious stuff. And was very lucky to have both of them say yes.
There's a sense of humor that he gets with this character that is kind of unexpected. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, but it's a kind of male entitlement that I think he has, you know, where he's afraid to talk to his family, but he wants to come off like he's the bigger man than he is, and he's clearly almost not capable of being the bigger man that he wants to portray himself as. And I found like a bit of a kind of comedy to that. I don't know if that was intentional or not. You're looking at me like it's not.
I think that's great.
I wasn't laughing.
I love that.
I wasn't like in the theater gut laughing or anything. But
No, that's great. I mean, Jake really brought so much to this character. One, he's kind of one of those actors where also like, I just don't quite know what he's going to do next, and it's very, I don't know, magnetic. You know, and I think Jerry, particularly in the back half of the film, just has something where it's like, oh boy, you know, what is going on in there and what's going to come out. And he felt that way on set too. I feel like between, you know, really sort of alive. And I think that sense of humor is actually important. I know what you're saying, and I'm happy to hear it.
well, even like right from the beginning, I'm a personable guy. Like I like people, you know, and it's like, you know, it's not working for you. You need to figure something else out. But that's what he's kind of committed to, this idea of his manhood as this thing.
I think part of that's the American dream, right? Especially in that time. But Jake's, you know, pretty handsome guy. He's, you know, Jerry's good with people, the character, athletic. I think at a young age, you're promised something that your life is going to be. And when it continues to reveal itself to not be that thing, are you able to see that?
What was the most difficult aspect of making the movie?
I mean, every day there was. I mean, it's really it's a crazy thing to do to make a film. I loved it so much, but it's so hard. I think learning to compromise, honestly, was the hardest thing. You have an image in your head, and you have to learn to say, okay, actually, we don't need that, or that's not worth it. And then you have to learn also to put your foot down about certain things, and walking that line, especially the first time. There were so many times where I just felt like I don't know what the right thing to do here is. How
did you pull it off?
You know, pull your hair out, and you.
I mean, you pulled it off. I mean, in the end, you pulled it off.
Yeah, it's just you know, it's really scary. It's really scary in a great way, but it's incredibly vulnerable.
Did you ever finish a day worried that you didn't get everything that you needed?
Absolutely, yeah. Our kid could only be on camera 5.5 hours a day, and he's in almost every scene. And you know, when people like Carey and Jake give you their trust, and the crew, and it's a great responsibility. It's one of the best times I've ever had. But
did you ever shoot their turnarounds without the without the kid on set? That'd be fascinating.
I think we did it once.
I mean, maybe we had to once or twice. Really tried to avoid that.
Yeah, but I think it was like...
I've had to do it before on other films.
I've had to do it a lot.
I think it's
by
so
choice.
hard.
I've had to, yeah, but I don't think we... just give me a tennis
Let that
ball.
slip there.
I'm not kidding. I think we did it once. I think just... It was like a night shoot. Maybe. It was like hot. I don't think he even had a line. I think I just had to look at him or something, you know.
I remember on this film, Okja, there's a little girl in it, and I have to talk to her, and we did her coverage. And then she had to go home, and so an adult went and stood in her clothes, but right there. and I know she's a young, you know, you're talking to her as if she's a young person, so, oh God, it felt horrible. I thought it was so hard as an actor. Anyway, I think I tried to avoid that for their sake.
What was it like working with this kid? He gives an incredible performance. How much of that is sort of all of you guys teaming up together and helping him through a performance? There's a lot of weight on his shoulders in this movie, not just as a kid performer, but like you said, he's in almost every scene, and he has a pretty significant arc that he has to deal with as an actor. Yeah,
I mean, it really, you know, he was, I think, 14 when we started shooting.
He was 15 playing 14.
Right, 15 playing 14, but it really didn't, you know, I've worked with child actors before, but it didn't feel like that at all, actually. It sort of just felt like working... we were a very small company of actors. It was me and Jake and Bill Camp, who's incredible in the film, and Ed. And it never really felt like a sort of child-parent, grown-up dynamic, really, working with him. He was experienced. He'd made a film before, and he was ready to work and very confident, you know.
I would go as far as to say his head was more confident than most of us.
Yes.
He'd done his homework. I think he's a real actor. He was prepared, and he was ready. He was really, I think, a special kid.
You mentioned that it was a really small company, and when you walk away from the film, it doesn't feel like a small company of a movie. It doesn't feel like a small indie film. It feels quite epic in scope, and I think that has to do a lot with the sort of sparse vision that you shot it with. But was that sort of going into it? You knew that you were going to have a small cast, that you were going to have sort of limited extras that you could really use, and that if you shot it this way, you would hopefully come out at the end with this scale much larger than you would think?
Well, certainly that's wonderful to hear, because that was the hope, and I sort of feel like that just comes from the guts and the heart first and foremost. What the film is about. I think what it's about is hopefully timeless, and I've always sort of hoped that the more personal something is, the more universal it is. I think there's sort of an archetypal foundation a little bit too. The land, the setting, and
Timelessly American.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the performances. I think these guys really did their work and brought a world to it. And I think those close-ups you mentioned in Warren Miller's house, for example. I think they feel big, and I hope that the film does at its core. Yeah.
Yeah, see the movie on the big screen. It's incredible on the big screen. Both of you, you were mentioning Paul's commitment to doing really great work as an actor, but both of you, I think looking at your filmographies, have a commitment to working with great directors and being a part of great projects. How hard is that to maintain in this industry?
I suppose, I've been extraordinarily lucky to work with the people I've worked with. I think great female roles like this come along not very often. And certainly on screen, this has sort of been one of the most exciting projects I've ever done, and my favorite experience making a film to date, yeah. So
Why is that?
Well, I sort of liked the people. And Zoe Kazan and I have been friends for 10 years, and I'd always wanted to work with Jake, and we were friends a little bit. I think it was the freedom that I felt on set. I think I'd never felt that, sort of untethered, but also really well protected and really challenged by the material. I felt like it was a really difficult crossword puzzle that I had to kind of attack every day. So all of those things combined, an amazing crew, the best people. We were all in this small town in Oklahoma, so it felt like summer camp. All of those things. It was just a sort of lovely, romantic, gorgeous experience, and a film that I really love doing. But those roles do come along quite rarely for women. So it's about sort of waiting for those parts. And what the great thing about Zoe and Paul's career is that they don't have to sit around and wait because they can write it. But I sadly don't have that amazing talent. So, sometimes it does feel like a bit of a waiting game, but totally worth the wait.
Well, I'll rephrase the question for you, Paul, because you said that you've known that you've wanted to make a movie for quite some time, and you look at the last 15 years or so of the movies that you've been in as an actor, and they're all with phenomenal directors that you could see an actor trying to learn from potentially. How long have you known, and have you been trying to pick up tidbits here and there from the directors that you've worked with?
That was a great rephrase, by the way.
They gave me the job for a reason.
Good transition. I think so. But I think by osmosis. I think really honestly because I love film so much. Once I fell in love with when I was growing up wanting to be an actor, I think it meant more on the stage for me. And then once I fell in love with film, I really fell in love with film. And so
when was that?
Probably I did my first film when I was 16, and it kind of opened the doors to knowing that there was a lot of different types of films out there, which I just didn't know at that age.
LIE?
LIE. Yeah. So going to Sundance, just seeing independent American cinema and sort of learning about this new world of films to go see or to rent, or which then led to learning who those filmmakers are and going, oh, who does that filmmaker like? And suddenly you're into foreign cinema, and then you're sort of off and running. So 19 or 20, really started to think, God, this is incredible, and I love sort of what people are doing with the camera and the sound and just the edit, and started daydreaming. And I do think it informed my acting, meaning it just feels really good to get to be in a film that you think you might like, or that you think has something to say, or it's easier, I think, when you feel like you're in good hands, because as an actor, you just sort of have to give yourself over. And I think when you don't is when you get this sort of like Hollywood stories of people like acting out or something. And I just don't think you get that when you have a filmmaker at the helm that people can trust and say, okay, yeah, let's give what we have to this.
90% of those Hollywood stories of people acting out are total BS, in my opinion, because acting is extremely vulnerable. And if you're in this place where you feel constricted or someone isn't supporting you, it's almost impossible to not act out, to not be like, hey, pay attention to me. It's like just a thing that actors have to do, I think.
That's great. I mean, yeah, I think
it.
you're probably right. I think that's and that's funny. Yeah, that's good.
Someone was on this stage recently saying that she loved a director so much because she felt seen by him. And she didn't mean that in an attention way. She just felt like someone was seeing the work that she was doing and knew how to guide it a certain way. And if you're doing work and you're on camera and everybody in the world's going to see it, and the person who's in control of that isn't seeing it, that's terrifying. I can't imagine doing something more terrifying outside of maybe, climbing a mountain without a wire or something. Anyway, questions, guys?
Hi. I just wanted to say that I saw the film not so long ago and thought it was one of the most poignant, beautiful pieces of cinema I've seen all year.
Thanks.
I wanted to know how. Sorry.
No, take your time.
Your role in Love and Mercy. Can you speak upon that? And how was it to film in Montana for wildlife?
Great. Yeah. So I did this film called Love and Mercy that's about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Probably my favorite acting experience I've had, I think because of the music. Studying it just gave me like a lot back. A troubled person, but who had a lot of light inside of him, and something from the music just, it made me really happy, even though he was kind of struggling. Montana is just a divine, beautiful place. I love how small I feel there in like the best sense of the word. You're sort of on the edge of the world in some way. And it feels like you're in touch with something. I highly recommend a road trip.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi. You've obviously taken on storytelling from all fronts. You acted on stage, you've acted in films, written films, and now directed one. How do you think that each kind of medium of storytelling you've done has impacted the other?
Wow, good question. So I think a lot, and so one, this was my first time writing, and probably because it's an adaptation, part of my approach to it was probably through my acting, meaning I just have learned how to read something and ask questions and sort of try to investigate the why behind the words. I think that really starts with theater, like because the written word is the thing in theater, so you're constantly learning to try to figure out the intent, even in the diction, with a play. Where in film, I don't think it's quite talked about often in the same way, like why is the comma there, right? So just even that. And I also think that all the arts in general just speak to each other in such a beautiful way. So I've actually read a lot about writing before I had written, but probably just trying to find some inspiration when I was feeling down and out one day, that went towards acting. So like, I remember reading Stephen King's book on writing and Ray Bradbury's, and finding like a lot of juice, so to speak, and hopefully that now goes into to writing and directing.
Okay, you do stage work as well. You just did this summer, right? You had a one-woman show at the Minetta Theater. How does that inform your work in front of the camera as well?
I don't know. I mean, doing a one-woman show was kind of a bucket list thing that I kind of always sort of weirdly wanted to do, but was terrified of, and I'd never found the right piece. And then this play came along called Girls and Boys by Dennis Kelly. And what I loved about it was it was really funny. And then I discovered that comedy was the hardest thing on the planet. And
Why is that?
well, I think, there's such... imagine yourself at a dinner party with a bunch of strangers and you want to tell an anecdote that sort of warms the room and makes people comfortable. And, the notion of basically the first page of the script, when I read it, I laughed. So the onus was on me to sort of make the audience laugh, I felt. And that's I think it's just a sort of terrifying prospect, the idea of telling a joke and people don't find it funny. I think we sort of worry about that in the playground when we're children, and so you transfer that to adulthood and to storytelling and to, someone not laughing at your joke implies a sort of lack of engagement, which you don't have in drama. If someone doesn't respond to something dramatically, you can't really tell, unless you make someone cry or shout at the cinema screen or shout at the stage, you can't tell whether they're engaged or not. Whereas with comedy, often, you're relying on that laugh or that sort of like warmth in the audience.
You know that something's supposed to be there.
I know
and if
that
it's
meant,
not there, something's wrong.
Yeah, and so I did the play in London, and it was written by a British playwright, and then there were a couple of things that were quite sort of location specific. So we brought it out to New York, and there are a couple of jokes in there that on the first preview in front of a New York audience just sort of bombed, and it was awful because the location, it just didn't geographically kind of translate. So that was exciting and terrifying and brilliant. But I think theatre for me is always sort of like building a muscle. I always feel like you come away from theatre just feeling like sort of very strong and ready to work and always really, I feel like every time I start a film, I can't remember how to act. And it takes me a couple of days to feel comfortable and get kind of to the point where I feel all right. And in theatre, I just... by the end of that, I feel like I can sort of, and it's always, sod's law that I end up not doing anything after the play, but I feel like it's the sort of, it's the kind of basis of everything we do.
Right, so it's the muscle from theater ends up being the muscle for film. And
I think
and
so,
else.
yeah, in my experience, just with the way that my career's kind of worked out.
I think it was an important part of Carey's work in this and Jake's work because it's a period film. Some of the language comes from a book. The facility with language feels really important, and especially in the way we shot the film, as you were talking about, to be able to navigate these little corners, like a slalom skier or something. I think, without question, having seen you in The Seagull and in Boys and Girls and other plays, Skylight, I can't imagine that was not so important, and even why we wanted Carey to play the part.
Going back to the way that you shot that film and the sparseness is oftentimes with films that want to be sparse, the performances can feel rigid and stuck within the frame, and you do an amazing job in this of somehow still giving the actors an incredible amount of room where it feels like they're just on the cusp of possibly breaking the really beautiful frame that you've set up, which is thrilling to watch.
That is great. That is so
good.
good.
Just trying to get you guys to come
No,
back.
I mean, that's so nice. I do
I
think
haven't seen the movie, Paul. No.
The film is fairly composed, but I think that their inner life is the movement. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah.
It's the thing that keeps you on the edge of your seat. One more question.
Hi. What were the most challenging moments of filming the film and working on wildlife?
I think there were countless times where I just cursed that it was a period film, even though I loved making the aesthetic of the film with everyone, just because money and it's so hard to, it's just so hard to make a film. We scouted endlessly to find locations that that not only looked wonderful for the film, but that we just didn't have to do as much to. Frankly, and that's one of the only ways that it was possible to make the film was finding the places to do it. Working with the actors.
It took a second.
Yeah.
It took a second.
Yeah. Good example of what Carey was talking about. Comedy being hard. Yeah.
But it's great that you capture these locations because at a certain point, they're not going to... There's no way that these locations can exist looking like this for that much longer, I would imagine.
No, that's probably right. But also like the place we filmed in Montana, it's not like it's just depressed and that's why it's a relic of its time. I think Livingston's actually quite a beautiful
It's
place.
so beautiful. Yeah, it was stunning.
So it's like a place that they kind of upkeep to be that way. They maintain it that way.
Yeah, I think it was touched up once for a film with a real budget as well, many years ago.
Guys, I love the film so much. I think I made that clear. It opens this Friday, right? People can see it.
Yeah.
Wildlife. It's playing at the IFC Center. It's playing, I think, at Lincoln Center as well, in LA as well.
Yeah, Landmark and ArcLight in LA, and then the next couple weeks
It'll expand.
out
So
there.
check out the website if you're not in New York or LA. Check it out. It's really beautiful. See it in the theater. I'm going to do that again and give them a big round of applause, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.